I thought I would just kick off and ask Robert one thing. I'd like to take you back 11 years to when you first did your application to King Alfred. It's a two-part question. First part is, what had you heard about the school when you saw the advert? What had you heard about the school? What were your impressions of the school? What were your hopes for the school? And the second part is, now 11 years on, what would you like people to be saying about us? We know this is a school that works on word of mouth. And what would you like people to be saying about us?
So, thank you. And first of all, can I say it's really lovely to see so many people here tonight, and really grateful for everybody coming. So I grew up in North London, and as you might know, and I kind of referenced it a bit in my talk, I went to a very different school to KAS. I went to haberdashers from the age of 7 to 18. And I was vaguely aware of KAS, but it seemed like a completely different kind of experience to the way that I had been educated and indeed brought up. So it was kind of vaguely there in my consciousness. I think I regarded it as sort of fairly bohemian and outside my comfort zone. And I did know, we did have a family friend who was a teacher here, so I knew a little bit about it. But also, when being in the sort of the hard end of the state system, I was probably a bit sniffy about it, and I thought, oh well, they don't really know what it's really like, in a real school sort of thing. And then when I was kind of at this point of thinking what I was going to do and how to extricate myself from this, as I talked about in my talk, I saw the advert for the job coming up. And I remember I was with my wife, and we were going actually to the Park Theatre that evening to see a little play that a friend of ours was putting on. And I remember we were talking about it. Should I apply? Should I not apply? Oh, well, give it a go. And then at that time, Cara and the KAS Society had put on a conference. So I thought I'd better go and see what it's like, just to sort of check it out. And it was the conference on homework, which some of you might remember. And funny enough, I remember sort of queuing up to go into the sports hall and standing behind sort of two people having a sort of deeply intellectual conversation about education. Turns out one of them was Stephen Debrett.
Who's here
and I thought, well, this is really interesting. So I encountered the process and was, very fortunate to be appointed. And as I went through the process, I kind of learnt more about it, learnt more about the school and the history of the school, and it was definitely a bit of a leap for me from where I had been, but I felt one that I needed to take at that time. I think when I look back now, what would I like people to say about the school? Well, I think hopefully I sort of captured that a bit towards the end of the speech. I think it is a school that is true to the vision of what education not only can be, but should be. And I think, my view is that education has lost its way very badly in this country, and that we are an outlier in global terms. And there are many jurisdictions where education is much more balanced and holistic and really kind of much more human-centered. But in this country, it's really hard to find. And it is quite looked down upon by parts of the other parts of the system. So I would like people to say, okay, this is a school where I can send my child will do really well academically, and they will be really happy, and they will also be really well prepared to go out into the world and be successful in the world as it actually is.
And hopefully it's still a bit bohemian as well.
Yes, and it is a school where you can, I suppose the other, so interesting, so it is a school where you can genuinely be yourself. Yeah. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not, and that is true whether you are a pupil of any age in the school, or indeed you are a teacher or a member of staff. And I think that's what I've really loved about the place, is that you can be yourself here, and that's quite rare to find, I think, in today's world.
Well, we certainly heard an anecdote at our council evening the other night when one of our council members recounted an incident of encountering you in your office with no shoes on. So clearly you've also learned to be yourself in this journey through King Alfred.
Indeed.
Brilliant. Listen, I've got more questions for Robert, but I would like to hand it over to the floor to see if anybody else has anyone got a burning question at the moment. Or Claire Murphy.
I just would like to know, what's the most important lesson the last 11 years has taught you?
Okay. There are different ways of answering that question, I think. But one of the things that has really made me think, I've had to think a lot about, is, when you're the head teacher, you are basically in a leadership role, and the responsibility lies on your shoulders. And interestingly, I take that the longer I've done the job, so I've been a head for 19 years. The longer I've done the job, the greater the weight of that responsibility I feel. I think when I started, I didn't really fully understand what it meant or could mean, and the impact my decisions had on people, children, families, and staff. And as I have, gone through this, it's an awakening. You realise, wow, these things really matter, and they are significant, and they have weight, and you have to treat that responsibility with real care, and always with care, because you don't ever quite know what the consequences of that could be. And I think it took me quite a long time to really understand that. And sometimes I sort of am surprised, as I've gone through my journey, people take me as the head teacher very seriously, and sometimes much more seriously than I take myself. And you're like, okay, so this really is important, I get this right. So I have taken, I think what I've learned is to take real care over things, and to, be quite, measured and, in terms of decision making. Never take rash decisions, never try and take emotionally based decisions, always really think things through. And I have, and always remember the human in any decisions that you make. So sometimes you have to make really difficult decisions, and I can think back on some I've had to take here that have been sort of deeply agonizing about what to do. And you've got to see the one side, you've got to see the other side, and then you've got to make a judgment, and you know that basically this person's telling you to do this person's telling you to do that. Ultimately, the judgment rests with you. And I think what I've learned is to be really careful with those judgments and try and make them as well as I can.
I liked very much the image of the river system, which you used in your talk. Now, I think it was a beautiful image, but it was also quite polite. If we put it a bit more bluntly, the school can be quite an unwieldy beast. 700 kids, 200 staff, and everyone's got a really strong opinion of what this school should be. So I just wanted to ask you, just kind of moving with Claire's question, what the biggest personal challenges were for you when you started at King Alfred's and kind of moving through, and also some of the greatest personal highlights when it came to bringing about change in this river system.
Yeah, so I think the hardest bit is when you're having to balance the individual and the institution. Okay. And that is really difficult. And that is difficult around children when things go wrong, and it's difficult about staff when things are not working in the way they should. And then you're faced with a complex decision, which is what is more important, what is right for that individual or what is right with the institution. And I always try and make the two things work together, but sometimes you can't. And then you've got to make a call one way or the other. Ultimately, you have to make a call in favour of the institution. But, I don't find that easy on a personal level. And I don't like being put in that position. So I work really hard to try and avoid being put in that position by things not going wrong in the first place. But sometimes they do. And then you've always got to put the institutional view first. But I, am not naturally wired to do that. So I've had to learn over my experience how to kind of overcome those difficult judgments. So I think that's what I found most challenging, and I can think of various examples along the way that have been, at various points where I've had to do that. And the second part of the question?
Greatest highlights, the sort of wins, personal wins for you in doing that.
Okay, the personal wins. So I think the personal wins, it's probably easier for me to think about the difficult moments than the highlights.
Okay.
But there have been obviously brilliant moments too. I think but interestingly, they are kind of quieter in a sense. Mm-hmm. So it is being in the Phoenix and just seeing an amazing production. It is seeing a kid perform a song in Unplugged, and you're thinking, my God, where did that come from? And it's deep. I find that deeply moving. It is walking round and seeing, the DT and the art and the photography and just the sheer quality of what young people produce. It is going down, to lower school and seeing the kids play with each other in their kind of free imagination and their sort of creativity that just sort of, they exude from within. And it's interesting, often I get to walk visitors around the school, and I always love that because first of all, you never quite know what you're going to find. And secondly, it's always so fascinating. It is always great, and you see, you get to kind of show off a bit what's happening, and it is all of these. It's the accumulation of all these things together, some of which are quite small, that kind of create that whole. And as a head teacher, walking the school is always, is definitely my sort of happiest moments.
Okay, thank you. Handing it over to the floor again, does anyone else have, lots of hands now. The first person I saw was Galia, and then Joe, and then Rebecca.
Hi, so just I'll take you back, take you forward to the future, because I think this river is going to be quite faster and more stormy. You might be lucky not to be there in the next decade and see what happens. I'm very curious to hear what you think would be, and in the scene of education, what would be really different? What would you have done to meet those changes?
For the next chapter.
Yeah. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was about the future of education, yes, and what could be some exciting changes that Robert would like to see happening.
The future of the KAS or the education scene in 10, 15 years.
Well, my honest answer to that is I see it not that different to what we're doing at the moment, because I think that clearly the pace of change in the world is moving fast. AI is the sort of definitely going to have a big impact, and it's going to take a little bit of time to understand what that impact is. It's certainly going to impact the workplace. It's going to impact university and I think schools too. But in that world, what is really going to be valuable, where is the real critical part, is the human. And often I think about, we talk about AI as artificial intelligence, but also think about human intelligence, and human intelligence in an AI world seems critical. And so what we, I think, do here incredibly well is we do nurture human intelligence in our children and young people. And I see evidence of that every day. And I think we need to continue to do that. And that is the ability to connect with others, to collaborate, to have fun together, to navigate disputes together, and find ways of being with people. And I think it's interesting to see what's happened with some of the tech stuff recently, that people are, they say, I want to move away from a world of technology. I crave the human. You read about that, for example, with things like dating apps, where people don't want dating apps anymore. They want to connect at events with actual human beings. And I think that is, as an example. So it is about the human being ever more important in the world to come. And I think we are brilliantly placed actually to do that. We probably need to shout about it a bit more than we do. But I think we've got all of the foundations in place to do that. And I think it puts us in a great position for the next 10 years.
Thank you. Joe.
I suppose I'm taking you back to the past. 8 years ago, we chose KAS on the basis of boats and goats. And whilst my question would like to be, do you regret not bringing goats back? I'd like to think, what do you see as, we chose boats and goats on the back, but that said to us this was a different school and was worth us trekking from Kew to here. It resonated your concept of other countries have different education systems. For me, this was the closest I could find to Australian education system. And so I'm wondering, in your mind, what are the equivalent of boats and goats to you for coming to KAS now?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, isn't it? So the boats and the goats are kind of signifiers. So they carry symbolic meaning, which then either connect people or actually put people off. They can do both. And it is important for every institution to have its signifiers, whatever they might be. It's not that I don't value signifiers, because I understand the role they play in people's perceptions and imaginations, but I'm actually much more interested in content, and I'm much more interested in quality. And so as I was saying to Annabel earlier, what I really want is I want people to understand in a deeper way what the totality of this experience is. And that's quite hard to capture, but it is about that long-term investment in a child's journey through childhood and adolescence to go out into the world. And I think anyone who now goes through this journey here has a very, very high quality experience. And it is about finding ways to communicate that. I think there are some also, it'd be great to think about the signifiers too. But ultimately for me, it's what I want. That's what I think I want to be able to communicate for people to come here.
Thank you. Rebecca, I think, was next.
Yes, thank you. I think I'm remembering this tradition correctly, but maybe others in the room will know better. But I believe that the outgoing president of the United States writes a letter to the incoming president in the Oval Office. And so I'm just wondering what you might write in such a letter to Stephen when he takes over in the autumn term.
So I think the first thing I would say, that's quite a big question. But there are a few things that immediately come to mind. The first thing I would say is you need to hold your nerve. So what is true in any role, and I think it is, one of the interesting things about being a head teacher is there's a very direct feedback loop, okay? Super direct. So it's not like you're sort of in a big office in a tower block somewhere in the city and you're making decisions that affect all the people over there, and you never actually encounter the people who are impacted by your decisions. In a school environment, you know very quickly. So you know from the pupils, you know from the staff, you know from the families. And that, I think, is if you can cope with that feedback, it's very, very positive. But sometimes that feedback can be a bit overwhelming as well. So I think the thing is, you have to be your own person. And this is what I would say to him. You have to make your decisions and you have to stick to them, not in a kind of stubborn, crazy kind of way, but if you've really thought something through and you believe in it, then yeah, you have to stick the course of what you've decided and not be blown into another direction. Because I think as soon as you do that, you basically lose it. But there's a balance with that, because you've also got to be able to listen to the feedback of those decisions, and you might not change course, but you might have to navigate through some of that stuff a bit more flexibly than you initially thought you would do. So I think, yeah, the key thing, because, and I think it goes back to the question about one of the things about what you learn, is ultimately what people want is they want you as the leader to be confident about what you're doing. They don't want someone who is going to, flip-flop around. And even if people don't always agree with you, what I've found is that they will come with you on the journey as long as you listen, but fundamentally stick to your course.
To give you a couple of minutes to come up with some more questions, I will now ask one of my own. Going back to your speech, you described your journey through the education systems, and obviously you've been ahead now at a time of unprecedented change, huge obstacles, and now with change happening around us faster than any of us can really grasp. So I wanted to ask you, as a head and someone who's direct experience with families and children is now extensive, what do you think the biggest challenges facing parents are today, and their children, but parents mainly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really interesting question, and I don't feel terribly well qualified to answer it. I mean, I think I have a perspective on it, but I think there's definitely going to be other perspectives too. I think for me, there are some very sort of obvious sort of things around, phones and technology, which is clearly a challenging area for all parents to manage with their children. But I do also think that has really taken a very significant step forward in the last 2 to 3 years, where I think the tide has really turned in a positive way around that. So I think technology has, of course, it has its good points, but you see how it has made children more insular, and it has made relationships more virtual, and it has definitely encouraged and fostered some lots of issues that were in a different way to previous generations. So when you've got the whole kind of cyberbullying thing has really been fostered by phones. So I think definitely technology is a big challenge for all families, and I think it's also a challenge for us as adults, because I'm not sure there's many people here today who would say they're entirely comfortable with the amount of time they spend on their phone. I'm certainly, often feel I spend too much time, inanely on my phone. So I think that's one area. I think another area is clearly it's been an interesting time over the last few years, sort of economically, and there is definitely a question about what a young person's life looks like through university and beyond. And you see growing numbers of young people who kind of are successful in school, go through to university, and then they don't really know necessarily what they want to do, or struggle to find a job, and the whole sort of work market has changed a lot. It feels certainly to even 10, 20, 15 years ago. So supporting your children to, navigate through that definitely seems a bit of a challenge. And I think that, again, makes it even more important the experience is good in school, so that, when the young people reach that stage, they are able to navigate it more effectively. And that's all the sort of emotional sides of that, as well as the, just getting a job side of it. So it seems to me that, you now read, isn't it, that adolescence goes on to about, 38 or something in the latest thing. And it's like, there is this sort of, I think parenting has got longer. It's like you do it for longer. My parents were quite happy to, after 18, sort of job done, really, off you go. And I just don't think it's like that anymore. So you're kind of in it for at least another 10 years.
Yeah, as someone whose children are all moving back, we're actually going in reverse in my household. I would agree with you on that one. Any other questions from the floor? Right, I've got Philip and Grace. Take you two. Philip first, then Grace.
If I can ask a less serious question.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting hearing the really serious stuff. But I recall when you said you first came to the school when you went to the conference, which would have been on a Saturday. But the next time would have been when you first walked in the gate, come for your day in the school to see what was going on, and then go on for the final interview process 11 years ago. Having regard to my recollection of your the clothes you were wearing when we first saw you, was one of your initial reactions when you walked in the gate, God, I'm going to have to buy a completely new wardrobe? and has that impacted positively on your style of clothing?
Great question.
Commenting on the current clothes.
Well, thank you, yeah. Well,
I'm sorry, it's not very serious.
No. Well, I wore a suit. So I wore a suit as a head teacher, and I wore a tie. And one of the great things is never having to wear a tie. I mean, the only time I wear a tie is when I go on to do an inspection for the ISI, and I absolutely hate it. So I certainly learnt to. It's freed me from the tie, which of course I had to wear at school. I've also, though I never got a tie, I also discovered barefoot shoes. So this was quite an interesting moment. And of course, I thought barefoot shoes. Should I get them? Should I not get them? Eventually, I sort of, as you see, I'm quite a cautious decision maker. And eventually, I decided to get barefoot shoes, and I thought, everyone's going to think I'm completely mad. And then, of course, I came into school, and half the male staff were wearing them. So it was definitely the right footwear for KAS.
And also I can reveal now that in our weekly meetings as chair and head, it wasn't only clothes. It was the diet. We've had veganism, pescatarianism, every few months a new kind of diet. I even had to cook the man dinner once when he was vegan. And of course the facial hair, which everyone has enjoyed, the progression of facial hair. So, I think there is another journey, Robert's sartorial journey through this school as well as the educational one.
What I'm looking forward to is, after gone travelling, is this might be slightly ambitious, but coming back with really long hair and a ponytail.
Watch this space. Well, we'll all look forward to your return visit with that. Grace.
I feel really bad asking this now because this is a bit more serious. So, like when we were first looking at schools 16 years ago, we found out about King Alfred's. One of the things when we were asking our friends, someone said to us, "Is it King Alfred's? Oh, that's like a fee-paying state school." And I'm just curious how you think King Alfred's aligns. So in the independent sector, King Alfred's in particularly aligns in future
So I think it's interesting. So I felt quite conflicted, if I'm honest, when I came to King Alfred, because I was, working in the really hard end of London schools, and then I was moving into what is clearly a very privileged community. And that wasn't the plan that I had for myself. And I did at the time, sort of the way that I myself talk about it was to say, well, I'm going to do this, but if I'm doing it, we need to use it for a good purpose, which is to help shift the system as a whole from the kind of, devastation that I was talking about earlier in the talk. And it's interesting, it took quite a long time to kind of get to a point where we could really seriously think about that. But one of the things I'm really proud of, actually, is that we do have increasingly deep connections with other state schools. And how do we use I don't want to sound like over sort of, using woke language and everything, but how do we use our privilege for a good reason, for a good purpose? And what we can do is we can bring resource and know-how into our work with others. And that doesn't mean they will then become like King Alfred, because I don't think that's very realistic. But we can, in that sort of empowerment model, we can open their eyes to say, actually, look, you can do more than you think. You can embrace some of this stuff, and we can help you on your journey, not our journey, but on your journey, whatever your journey may be. So we've done that, I think, in a few different ways. So we've got our local partnership with some great state schools, and they, this Friday, for example, we've got about 20 people coming in to do some middle leadership training that is all about that kind of human-centered approach. And we resource it, we provide it, and then those people go back to their schools, feel more empowered and able to do that in their own spaces. We've also tried to do that through our networks, through Rethinking Assessment, which we've played a big part in. We were one of the few people who put money into it right at the beginning, and went to lots of meetings to help get it set up. We've done it through the Schools Directors Courses Consortium, again, which is very much a King Alfred project that we've created and connected people together. And we've also done it through our contribution to other networks. So I think I've been really pleased how we've kind of become a really significant player within the sort of more progressive-minded part of the community. And when I was saying earlier about how I felt a bit sniffy, when I was in the state system about King Alfred, you definitely do feel that. But what I would say, over time, you build relationships and that goes away. So we now have, some of us were at a conference just not this week, but the week before. And, King Alfred we were not the central part of it, but we were a really important part of that in terms of the input and networks that we formed. And that is great. So we are not, outside that state school network. We are really connected into it and trying to have a positive influence on, on helping people on their own journeys. So I think that, that's happened really over about the last 3 or 4 years. Post-COVID, I think that's where we've got some momentum for that. I'd really love to see that carrying on. It is in the founding principles of the school to be a demonstration school, and that isn't the language we would use anymore, I think, but it captures a sense that it's important we make a contribution. And I think, again, you go back to the wheel and that bit about, here about contribution, that is true on an individual level. It's also true on an institutional level. And, we're not expecting to get anything back from that. It's not a transaction where we put this in and we're going to get this back. But interestingly, it's an investment. And I think what my experience is with investment is you invest into a system and things will come back to you, and you can't necessarily know what they will be, but they will, if you put good things out there, good things will come back. And I've really seen that. And I think it's all the other thing from a sort of purely KAS lens, it's also made us much more outward looking. So we have to know what's going on elsewhere. It's very easy for progressive institutions to become very ossified and insular. You see that everywhere. So you've got to keep being outward looking and, open, non-judgmental about what other people are doing. And I think if you put stuff into the system, you'll definitely get stuff back.
Certainly one of the things that we talked about a lot when we were working more closely together was there was more the debate around privilege, and certainly using the word independent rather than private school to denote the kind of school we are, because we have a privilege which comes with our independence, and you've just really well articulated how we use that independence. Now, taking Grace's question one step further, obviously independent schools are under a huge amount of pressure because of VAT. I just wondered what you've given your kind of vision for the value that King Alfred provides, but what about the independent sector in general? The fact is we are under pressure, but pressure can also be a good thing. It causes people to have to think more carefully about what they're doing. So I wondered if you could just give an idea of what you think the future of independent schooling is, and where that value, is there value, and where does that lie?
So, the reality is that I've never really felt that comfortable in the sort of independent world of the wider independent world. So, when I go to events, I haven't always felt like I've really fitted in with all the other people there. Sometimes come from what feels like quite different starting points. So, and we have some really good links with some independent schools, but I think going back to our kind of founding principles, I've been more interested in the links with the state schools. But in terms of that wider sector, it's clearly, what it feels to me is every parent wants the best for their child, unmistakably. And with a private education, an independent education, effectively, you are making a very significant financial commitment and investment in your child. And that investment is a lot of money, right? But that is, if you think about it over whether it's 2 years, whether it's 7 years, whether it's 13 years, that is a very large sum of money, which is beyond the realms of many people. It's only as an increasingly small percentage of the population who can consider it. But if you are in a position to do that, it is an amazing investment, because you are giving your child opportunities that they will not get elsewhere. And I'm really clear about what those opportunities are at KAS that are different. In other places, those opportunities look a bit different, though, don't they? So sometimes it's a very sort of, elite academic education. In other cases, it might be about, meeting a more complex set of needs for your child. So it is about, I think, the independent schools thinking, what is it, given that the total sum of money over those years is now so significant, what is it that they are, what's going to persuade people to invest that into their child? And of course, there's also within that, there is definitely some prejudice against independent education. So you've not only got to believe in that investment, you don't want to be put off by the negativity that is then directed from some quarters at people who are privately educated. But I think there is, clearly we're seeing a sort of shaking out of the independent sector. Those schools that were already a bit fragile have definitely, been have gone or been taken over or whatever. And there will be some schools that have been less fragile but are also at risk of that. But I think if the school is really clear what it's seeking to do, and it really delivers the quality of what it says it's going to do, there will always be people who will find a way to make that happen. And and that is, so I think there is a future, but as you say, it is that those additional pressures means everyone's got to get sharper and better, I think, at what they do.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? At back, yes.
Hi, Grace.
I just want to say I really commend you on being not only a true educator, but also an innovator. Because innovation is really hard, and you get a lot of slings and arrows on the back. And I think education can be such a personal thing. So many parents choose an education because it's similar to what we had and what we experienced. And so to change that, to go against that, feels like going against ourselves. And I remember when we first met, and I said to you, I said, I don't think what you're doing here is that radical. And you said, yes, you're right. And so I want to give you a chance to think about. So if you wanted to be more radical, and you had a chance to tear up the system as it is, how would you redesign education now, given your wealth of experience?
Okay, thank you. So I think.
So the question was, if you could be really radical, carte blanche, what would you do?
Yeah. So the truth is, I'm not a very radical person. And I am a great believer in balance. That is, that is what I've always seen it. And so for me, the issue is to create a more balanced system, or a system that encourages a more balanced approach to education. And one of the book that I've just been co-editing talks quite a lot about this. So it takes the notion of the head, the heart, and the hand, which was coined by this Swiss educationalist at the time of the French Revolution. And when you look at the head, heart, and hand, you can track it back right the way to classical times, Aristotle, Plato, all of those people, and then subsequently. And then what they all believed, actually, is in a balanced education. An education that attended to the intellect, that attended to the skills that you have to do stuff in the world, and that attended to the sort of emotional side of development, the heart. And what I really believe is that, so I believe in that. I think you need all three. And I've always believed that. The difficulty is that the system that we have at the moment in this country is massively over-indexed on the head. And it doesn't pay nearly enough attention to the other parts. And it is a system that has lost its sense of balance. So when I think about King Alfred, what I hope is that we have created a balance here, a much better balance than you will find in, pretty much any other. Certainly, I think you find it more in primary, but certainly any other secondary school. And it's interesting. I talked about Ken Robinson in my talk, and when you read all of Ken Robinson's stuff, what is the word he uses most? He uses the word balance most. And so we have to get back to the balance. So what if I was to redesign the system? I would redesign the system so that rather than incentivizing imbalance, it incentivized balance. And so I talked about all those terrible incentives that you have as a head in the system to do this, that, and the other. So, for example, Ofsted, needs to start from first principles around what a balanced education looks like. There is, interestingly, a white paper that's come out from the government that has lots of good things in it, and it kind of edges towards a more balanced place. It needs to be bolder, and they need to follow through on it. The reality is, and this is what is frustrating, is that when you talk to anybody who about, kind of remove it from the sort of the system, if you like, and say, what do you think about education? Everyone will say the same. Everyone will say, well, it should be balanced, da, 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 da. And then they go and create a system that is completely unbalanced. And interestingly, in that system they create, they don't even create the imbalance deliberately. It's kind of driven by the bureaucratic needs of the system. And, it's all these unintended consequences. And of course, as we know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So they think they're all doing an amazing thing, right? They really believe in it, but they don't understand how that then impacts on the ground. So if I was to, be education minister, say, or in one of those positions, I would say, let's start with the starting principles. What is it that we want for our children? And, and on a much deeper intellectual level than what you see in the way people generally talk about it. People talk about, we need a bit of, financial education, or we need to sort of do more about, AI or whatever. And this is all second tier thinking. They're not getting to the first tier thinking, which is purpose. And I think that's what I've found so frustrating about my time in education. And that's what I've really welcomed about being here, is you can, in an unedited way, talk about like real educational philosophy and beliefs. And I think there should be much more of that than there is. And I think when you give people the space to do that, they will pretty much, there'll be slight varieties, but they won't be that, the vast majority of people will be saying the same thing. So that's what I would like to see for the future. And I suppose if I do stuff when I leave and I get involved in other ways in the education system, that is what I'll be arguing for.
Sounds like an audition to be the next education minister to me. Watch this space.
Yeah.
Any more questions, Fiona, at the back?
I've been with the school for a very long time, and the thing that drew me to the school in the first place was one of the founding principles, which was, and we haven't actually sort of touched on tonight, but it was the founding principle, one of them was that it was a rational school. And you've talked a lot about balance tonight, and I wondered but we don't talk so much about the rational side of it, and I wondered if you feel whether that actually is balance, is rational, is the thing. It's to question everything that we do, and if you have done that brilliantly as a head here and carried on from the previous way the school was run, which has been very important to me, so I wondered how you felt about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that what you see is in the language. So over the last 10 years, this language of education science has been hijacked by certain people in the system to basically pursue their own prejudiced philosophy about what education should be. So they take this notion of science and then they, say, well, what that means is this, and if you're not doing this, then clearly you've got it wrong. So I've been incredibly, distressed really by seeing that, and the sort of, again, it seems without really kind of intellectual integrity to me. So I'm slightly wary of the word science because it kind of suggests that there is an answer. We just got to find the answer and apply it, and then education would be brilliant. I think, again, going back to some of the other questions that we've had this evening, what I really, again, one of the things I believe very strongly and have learned as I've done this job longer, is that education is a human experience, and human beings are fundamentally messy, right? They are emotional. They are a combination of you know, they do things that are sometimes, you know, not very clever and, you know, poor judgment and all the rest of it. And that, you know, they respond differently. They have different trigger points to different things. And I think the slight fear, I mean, it might be different to the rational bit, but I'll come back to that. But certainly on the science bit, it's like, I think that can be misused and it can take us away from the sort of fundamental human nature of interaction between, you know, teacher and pupil, pupil and pupil, and that sort of, that alchemy, if you like, of learning. And, you know, I talked, didn't I, about, you know, my teaching practice, which was hairy at points, but it had some really great moments. And you're just like, you suddenly captivated everybody. And I didn't do anything differently that day to the next day, but you somehow made a connection that was, I think is really hard to pin down exactly what that was. And it's about a human connection between you and a group of other people there. So I think that's my thoughts about science. On rational, yeah, I'm completely with that I think maybe the way that I see the rational is around the data point. That, you know, we all make assumptions and we all, you know, hope everything is good and so on and so forth. But you have to engage with the data. You have to, if you're going to, you know, going back to the innovation point, if you're going to do innovation, you've got to look at the data. And that data is quantitative. It's also qualitative. Because if you've got everyone telling you, you might think it's the best idea in the world, but if everyone's telling you it's not working, you've got to hear that. So I think it is about using data in an intelligent way and not in a crude way. And that is a fundamental part of a rational approach. And I'm really proud, actually, that I think we use data a lot better now than we did a few years ago. I think we've still got a bit further to go. And, you know, data is our friend, and data is not in opposition to the human. It's just got to be used as to inform the human rather than as a conclusion in itself.
Thank you. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So Tim's got his hand up and Elisa. Tim?
Well, thank you. It's been a lovely evening. I'm asking this as someone who has worked in a company since I was 22. And as that young student in Bloomsbury in this education, moving Dennis Houston building, that which we all appreciate, do you kind of wish you'd come here or somewhere similar early, or do you do the insight of those years in working going economics, statistics, where, do you look back and actually that really helped me know what I want to do, or I can spend long there doing it from the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting question, but you know, for me, I think this was the right thing at the right time, actually. And I think I had gained some really good experiences. I obviously had, you know, there were highs and lows with that. But it did mean when I got here, I was, you know, ready to do the things that I wanted to do and could do. And I had the sufficient sort of skills to do that. I mean, I think what we also find is that, I think this is true of pupils, staff and families, is that the people who appreciate this place the most are people who have seen something different. And so I had seen something different and experienced that, and that may, I'm not complaining about the quality of the free lunch, or the size of the classrooms, or the sort of the fact that whatever it might be. I'm like, this is incredible, and has the potential to grow even more. And so I think having that experience really made me appreciate it, but also enabled me to bring the set of experiences that hopefully have been beneficial to the institution as well.
Elisa?
Try
figure out how to formulate this. So our family joined the same year that you did. My son is now in year 10. And I remember sitting up in the old library as you had a bunch of us that everyone was invited that wanted to come and mind map what the school represented to us, what we wanted it to be. So obviously very, very early information gathering for your wheel building. I've appreciated the engagement with the community and how much of an open door policy you've had as a head. We've been empowered as parents to speak our voice. Sometimes that can be challenging, I can imagine, for you as a head. And you alluded to that. But if you look back on starting as a head and for us as a community now carrying on, what do you think would be most helpful in the way that we as a parent community engage with the new head joining?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all to say that I generally think the parent body here is amazing parent body. And there obviously have been some instances of challenge where it's been difficult to manage. But leaving those to one side, 96% of the experience has been incredibly positive. And, I think the parents here have also really helped the school move forward. It has felt like a collaboration. So a really good example of that is about the diversity work we did. And that really came from, it obviously came from within the staff and the students, but it was very powerful from the parents. And it's kind of like, you're right, actually, this is something we've got to really take more at a higher level of seriousness than we've done so far. So I think it helps having a bit of experience and being settled in, because you could easily experience that as kind of challenge and criticism, or you can experience it as helpful collaboration. And you've also got, talk about holding your nerve, we talked about before, and also the innovation point. So sometimes it goes wrong. I can think of one really bad example when it went wrong. And you're like, oh my God, this is awful. But then it's interesting because that in itself becomes an opportunity for growth, both for you and the people you're working with. If you can turn it round, if you can frame it positively, rather than being, it's got to be kind of soft at the edges. It can become a positive even when things go wrong rather than the negative. So I think that I had to learn that while I was here. And I think it's interesting because you also have staff who you're also having to manage who might say, oh, you're being too accommodating to the parents, right? You need to stick up more, So you've got different stakeholder groups that you're balancing. And that's why you've got to know yourself and not be swayed by the power of the voice, if you like. You've got to hear the voice, but then make your own decisions and stick with them. So I think for the new head, I think inevitably there is a settling in period, and say to everybody who joins the school as a member of staff and indeed as a pupil, it takes a year just to kind of find your feet. And you've got to get to know people, you've got to build relationships, you've got to understand the dynamics of how things work. So I think I suppose my advice would be, just be a bit standoffish at the beginning and just allow the person to find out who they are. And then, I think it isn't, I think as parents, you have a lot to offer, and it is about offering that in a positive, constructive spirit and with some sensitivity to the pressures that Stephen may find himself under. But I think it is important that contribution is still there. It's just about, the kind of sensitivity really about how it's channeled and how it's communicated.
Hear that, everybody, okay? 30 seconds before I wrap it up. Plans for the future other than becoming Education Minister? Other things you can tell us about?
Well, so going to take a break and the plan is to go travelling and
Grow
for
that hair.
extended period of time, and hopefully get some insights about the future when travelling. And then, one of the things I've really enjoyed over the last few years is getting better at writing. So I've really enjoyed writing I say really enjoy, most of the time I really enjoy, writing my weekly message. And it has made me, when you have the discipline of having to write something every week, it's made me much better at writing. And I've also enjoyed being involved in this book. So I'm kind of, interested to explore that further, but also slightly apprehensive that I don't know how it's going to turn out. And then, I see, I've been thinking quite a lot about this. To me, the next stage is not kind of stopping. Actually, it's just transitioning to something where I'm still quite ambitious about what I want to do and the impact I want to make. It might be through writing, it might be through something else, but I will have everything I've learned here, I think, is really going to help me into that next stage.
Well, as Dorothy Parker said, I dislike writing, but I love having written. So perhaps that's a word of wisdom to take you into the next phase of your career. Just wanted to say a big thank you to Robert for tonight and for giving us all this time. In the last few days, we had a council dinner, sort of beginning of this slow saying goodbye process, and hearing people talk about Robert, the same words, good words come up, integrity, wisdom, patience. I think we all feel that we've been heard by Robert. And it's very nice to hear you tonight. And I would say also, talking about that balance, perhaps not revolution, but balance, I feel that certainly in this journey here, you have achieved that balance and you have really evidenced that to us tonight. So thank you for being our head. Thank you for having us. We're a tough crowd sometimes. Thank you for having us. And I'm sure everyone, on behalf of the Society, which is the Society's night, on behalf of Council and the Society, we wish you every piece of luck for the next stage, and thank you.
Thank you.